Hello and welcome, Steelper. We're talking about heroes again as part of this series that we're doing, helping players understand what hero they might want to play when they start playing Flesh and Blood. So if you have a new player thinking about playing Dorinthea, this is the video that they should be watching. If you are a new player, this is the video that you should be watching. Several things to understand first about Dorinthea. So Dorinthea is our warrior hero. That is her class. There are other warriors. There are light warriors. There are young blitz warriors like Kasai. But Dorinthea is focused around one main thing, which is her Dawnblade weapon. Dorinthea's hero ability says when your weapon attack hits, so when the physical damage from the weapon connects, you may attack an additional time with that weapon this turn. The important part about that interaction is that it does not grant you go again. You have to get go again from another ability in order to attack with Dawnblade twice. Now, you might guess it, there are a lot of cards in Warrior that give weapon attacks go again. Dawnblade says once per turn action, one resource attack. If Dawnblade hits and it is the second time it has hit this turn, put a 1+1 damage counter on Dawnblade. At the beginning of your end phase, Dawnblade did not hit at all this turn. Remove all +1 counters from Dawnblade. I think you're starting to get the impression and the correct understanding that Dawnblade is the whole point of playing this class. Dorinthea's turns essentially go either play a card that buffs Dawnblade and gives it go again, swing with the weapon, and then find some way to make it hit and get go again, and then trigger Dorinthea, and then attack a second time with Dawnblade. That is essentially the framework of Dorinthea's turns. Now, how do we get this to be a bit spicier? Obviously, Dawnblade has ways to buff itself, so you have the counters that it gets if it hits. Then also you have a lot of attack reactions, and this is kind of what Warrior is famous for, is attack reactions. Attack reactions basically can be played during the attack reaction step, which means it's after your opponent has defended, before you play defense, before they've played defense reactions. There is a separate window to play attack and defense reactions. If you do not play an attack reaction and your opponent does not play a defense reaction, the attack reaction step is over. That's important to remember when you're looking at the rules about attack and defense reactions, is that the attacker has to play an attack reaction first. If they pass and no defense reaction is played either, then the damage step starts and neither person can play any more reactions. If either player plays a reaction, the other player can play a reaction as well. The only other thing to note before we dive into some deck ideas and things like that is Reprise. The Reprise is Dorinthea's special keyword ability. It says if the defending hero has defended with a card from their hand this turn, or this chain link, you draw a card, right? So that means that if they, sorry, not this turn, this chain link, that means that if your opponent defends with a card from hand, either a defense reaction or a card they've blocked with, then the Reprise is active, and you will see there are various reprise effects on Dorinthea's cards. So Glint the Quicksilver, for example, will draw a card if someone has defended from hand. Rout, which is a really powerful attack reaction card that some warriors really like, lets you return a card from the combat link to their hand. So the attack reactions basically allow you to get around rough situations and make your opponent block differently. Now, Dorinthea is very, very good for playing mind games with your opponent. So if you're the sort of player who likes that idea of I'm attacking with a naked attack, and if you don't block me in exactly the right way, but you can't see that way because you're not in my head, then you lose, then Dorinthea might be the hero for you. The caveat I will say to that is that if you have played against Dorinthea a lot, then you understand quite well her breakpoints and when she can push damage through. And that lets you block Dorinthea very, very well, right? Because the counter to attack reactions is obviously defense reactions. So if you're playing against Dorinthea and you're running your defense reactions and you've played against Dorinthea very well, you understand that if her weapon is coming in for 3 and she has 2 cards in hand, it's very, very likely she can't get above 9 damage. And therefore, if you block properly, the attack won't go through. And if the first attack doesn't go through, then you can't trigger Dorinthea's effect. And it's very important to understand that if Dorinthea does not hit with her sword, or play a card that lets her attack with her sword again, similar to her ability, she can't actually use her sword again because remember, this is a once per turn action, right? So she needs to hit with the weapon to get the effect. Now, Dorinthea has been a very consistent hero. She was consistent in a lot of the Blitz meta, the early Blitz meta. just for having that attack reaction that creates these really interesting turns. And you will see, looking at her deck, there's a lot of cards in here that are essentially all attack reactions. You've got Spoils of War, you've got Steel Blade Supremacy, you've got Stroke of Foresight. We'll quickly look through all of these. These are all attack reactions. So this is a 0 cost. If your defending player has defended with a card from their hand, this chain link, target weapon gets +3. So it punishes you if you defend. 3 cost, target weapon gets +4. If they defended, they get another +2. So if they defend badly, you can get +6. Spoils of War is from Crucible. So this is a Majestic. It's one of the more powerful cards in the set. Let's talk about that in a second. Stroke of Foresight gets +3. If they've defended, you can draw a card and put a card from your hand on the top of the deck. So you'll see a lot of effects rely on your opponent blocking with cards from their hand to enable kicker effects. But ultimately, as the game goes down and health gets lower, you are going to have to block with cards from your hand. So really, there's a lot of incentive for blocking with cards from your hand in the game, and you can't just take all the damage that Dorinthea is putting out from you to you, especially in Blitz. So you have to block, and when you block, Dorinthea gets stronger, and that's why a lot of players enjoy playing Dorinthea, because it punishes your opponent for blocking, and they have to block, right? Because that's the game, right? A lot of players who played against Dorinthea very well will understand when they can block and when they can block with defense reactions from Arsenal, which won't trigger reprise. But Dorinthea also just does have a lot of damage to push forward. One of the key cards in Dorinthea is this card called Warrior's Valor. Warrior's Valor costs 1. It gives your next weapon attack +3, so it's coming in for 6 as a base. If it hits, it gets go again. Now, playing Warrior's Valor into a Stroke of Foresight or something like that means you're coming in for 9 off 1 blue pitched card. And if it hits, you get go again for free, basically. You do still have to pitch to pay for the sword. But the point is that that can push a lot of damage through on a turn. So if you like the idea of playing through these defense reactions, playing with your opponent's mind a bit and sort of try to make them guess what you've got in the hand and kind of outplaying them, then Dorinthea is a really good hero for you. She suffers into some of the current meta decks in terms of maybe they can put out more damage than her and put her on the back foot. She suffers specifically against Prism because she gets controlled very easily by some of the stuff that Prism likes to do to control people with the auras and slowing the gameplay down. But at the base level, Dorinthea is about swinging her sword, very sort of classic warrior feeling, where she's more about the weapon attack than her magic power or special abilities or anything like that. About the weapon attack and responding to what your opponent plays. So you'll have a card full of hands, and based on what your opponent does, you can play the card that screws them over or counters them or does something against them. And you'll see that theme just throughout all of her decks. That's why most of her cards are, in fact, attack reactions to react to things your opponent has done when you're attacking. So if you like the idea of that kind of gameplay style where you're reacting to what's been attacked, then it's worth giving Dorinthea a try. You will get to play a lot of very interesting cards. There are a lot of very, very good cards in here. Let's look at stuff like Hit and Run. Dauntless is quite good. Let's have a look at that. We've already shown you Warrior's Valor, which is a power card, and we'll look at Spoils of War. And Out for Blood. Let's look at those. I mean, her specializations as well. Singing Steelblade is very good, and Steelblade Supremacy is very good. So Plowed Through is an interesting one. Came about in Monarch. Not a lot of Dorinthea decks I've seen have played this, but some of them have. Basically, if your next weapon attack +3, and if your opponent blocks it badly, it gets an extra +1. That +1 may seem small, but what it does essentially is pushes your attack to 7. And 7 is obviously a 2-card or piece of armor block, which is a very important breakpoint to understand when playing heroes like Dorinthea. Dorinthea is a really good hero for teaching you about breakpoints because you need that first weapon attack to hit, which means that you're in a situation where you have to buff to a certain point to get it through or make your opponent spend a lot of cards from their hand. The buffing to 7, if they block with an attack action, and making it difficult for them to block, is actually a very, very good breakpoint because it makes it much more likely that your sword is going to hit, and therefore you're going to get the Dorinthea ability trigger. Twinning Blade, this is a lovely full art card. Very hard to get the full art card because it's in first edition of Crucible only, but there is a regular version of it. Basically, it lets you attack an additional time with your sword this turn. What that means is that if you haven't hit with your weapon, Dorinthea's ability hasn't triggered, you can play Twinning Blade to get the trigger of Dorinthea, essentially the same thing as the trigger of Dorinthea, and then attack with your sword a second time. If you get go again on the second attack, as you've already had it on the first one, obviously, or you wouldn't be able to play Twinning Blade. You wouldn't be able to attack second time. if you can get the attack the second time, go again, then Dorinthea will trigger when that one hits, and then you can attack a third time with the sword, which is why Twinning Blade is so good. So if your first attack is blocked, Twinning Blade opens up a lot of avenues for you. Why is it? It's why it's such an interesting card. Hit and run's a really, really powerful common. Automatically gives you a next weapon attack go again, which is a huge threat. And also has some flexibility that if you play it after you've attacked with your weapon, it gives your next attack +3. So you can choose to play it, and if you've got 2 of them in your hand, you can play one to give the first attack go again, and then another one to give the second attack +3, which is just a really powerful, flexible card. Dauntless gives your attack +3. You're seeing 3 is a big number in Dorinthea. 1 for +3 is a pretty common number across the game, which is important to memorize. All the stuff like Razor Reflex, all those kind of cards all give +3. The +3 is a very common buff point for the game, and that's because +3 is basically equivalent to a card. So I'm paying 1 to make you block with another card from your hand, is what this card says, right? But the caveat of this is the next defense reaction card the defending hero plays this turn costs an additional 1. That can create a lot of problems for people playing into Dorinthea in terms of playing defense reactions, because people want to play defense reactions into Dorinthea because they want to see what she's doing to buff the attack before they play defense reactions to stop it. They also want to block with a card from hand, get your cards out of your hand, and then block with the defense reaction to shut down whatever it is you tried to do. Out for blood, +3. If they defended, then your next attack gets +1. It can be really good for the second weapon swing. Singing Steelblade is one of Dorinthea's specializations. It gives the attack +1 as a defense reaction, but the reprise effect is really what you want. It lets you go and get any attack reaction card from your deck, like, for example, Twinning Blade, and banish it face up, and then can play it. So for a good play here for you aspiring Dorinthea players is if they block out your attack, you can still, so they block, say, for 9 on your first attack. You can play the Singing Steelblade, get +1, and then either search your deck for a go again with Glint, and then play a different attack action. That's Glint the Quicksilver, which gives you go again, and you'll draw a card as well. Or you can go and get Twinning Blade, and then you can play Twinning Blade and attack with the weapon again, even though they blocked the first one. Right? So there's a few different options available for you there. Singing Steelblade enables them. Steelblade Supremacy as well just makes this really killer turn. You really have to get these if you want to play Dorinthea. You spend 1, you get +2. Whenever this weapon hits, draw a card. Coming in for 5 with your sword, plus whatever else you've done to it. And the threat of drawing a card if it hits is massive. Opponents will often full block out this turn, which gives you an opportunity to get some cards into arsenal, and either to push some damage through, or at least, put your opponent on the back foot if you didn't have tempo before. So that's kind of Dorinthea. We're not going to go into any more of the cards here. I think really the summary of this video, if you're thinking about playing Dorinthea, is she's really good at messing with your opponent, at pushing damage through and kind of playing with the game on the table, and punishing opponents that block badly or block that make a mistake. She does fall out of favor depending on the meta, but she has consistently performed. She is one of those heroes I feel like will always consistently perform because her basic strategy is so straightforward, but also has a lot of flexibility to it. And even when she is behind, I still think she has good game into a lot of the heroes. So I think she's a pretty solid choice if you're looking for a hero to main. Though at the moment she isn't as strong as she has been in the past. And that's something to bear in mind. But I think there's a lot to be said for our favourite warrior hero, Dorinthea Ironsong. Plus her art is genuinely fantastic.